Hey guys, welcome back to our another video, and this one is actually talking about the differences between men and women's skin and how aging affects their skin uniquely. This can help you decide on what skincare products to focus on. Now, this is actually a video response to one of my clients that comes in regularly for a facial, and her son has come in a couple of times, and she wanted to figure out what skincare products to kind of so she didn't have to buy double of everything. And there was some things that we could buy one of and other ones that we had to do totally different ones. So she wanted to know, like, what was the difference between men and women's skin? Is it just because her son is going through puberty? So this is a response to that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I can tell you that for the most part, in my experience working on men and women's skin, this next part is not basically based on any clinical studies. This is literally the thousands of skin types that I have worked on. And what I have found, generally speaking, is most of my severe acne clients have been men 14 to 25 years. So that's the first one. Most men that I've worked on typically have thicker skin. They have larger pores. They produce more oil. And when they do have hyperpigmentation, it's usually on the driver's side. So they're getting a lot of sun exposure there. So they may have a small age spot or spots, or when they do have hyperpigmentation patches, it's usually where they have shaved. So typically a lot of men do not wear sunscreen, and so they're shaving every single morning, and then they're going out there and exposing their skin to the sun, and so that's how they start to get the hyperpigmentation. And that's usually, when it's patches, it's where they shave. It's usually along the jawline, on their neck, and the back of their neck actually gets hyperpigmentation patches as well. The other thing that I have noticed is, although more women come in for anti-aging facials, the men that have come in, their wrinkles tend to be deeper. So whether it's the number 11 lines or the crow's feet on the side or the along the nasolabial folds, they tend to have deeper wrinkles, and I don't know if it's because they do get more sun exposure, or they don't wear any sunscreen, or only now later in their life is when they're starting to pay attention to their skincare. Now, this is all based on my personal experience working hands-on with these clients. The next couple of points that we're going to be making is actually based on clinical studies and clinical trials. And as always, the links to the clinical trials will be in my blog, and I'll put the link of my blog in the description below. Now, I did want to note that these clinical studies, some of the results are actually, they are conflicted, they are contradictory, and that you have to remember results are based differently because it's based on environmental factors, age of the subjects, if they were using skincare products, sun exposure, the different measurement machines that they were using. So there's all these different factors in these tests, so please take that into consideration. Now, for the most part, most of the studies did show the same results, that overall men's skin are thicker. They do produce more sebum. Their pore size is larger. And hyperpigmentation, actually, which was interesting, usually the more women show hyperpigmentation challenges, but the color, there's definitely a variance in color with men. And lastly was hair growth. So basically what it showed was for both men and women before puberty, so as boys and girls, the skin actually, when they measured pore size and oil production and all of that, was pretty much the same up until puberty, when hormones kicked in. And that's when the pore size, oil production, hair growth changed for men as well as for women. So hormones definitely play a major role in how the skin appears. And for women, the major effects happened in puberty, but more so how their skin aged before menopause, during menopause, and after menopause. Because as the estrogen started to decrease, then what happened is collagen production also started to slow down, which affects the thickness of the skin. So obviously, as not only does the skin thin because the collagen decreases, so what happens is the collagen and elastin formations also get affected. And so when your skin is actually tightly wound, when it starts to loosen, then the fibers start to loosen. Then also the appearance of the pores also start to increase. And for some women, they start to get acne in their 50s, or actually from mid 30s. It can affect them from mid 30s all the way up into 50s because of the hormone fluctuations. So men tend to experience more contagious type of skin diseases, where women experience more hyperpigmentation related diseases, allergic diseases, autoimmune diseases, and it even mentioned that women had more psychosomatic related diseases, which I didn't want to put in here because it's not really related to skin. But so those are the differences as far as the skin related diseases. So the first one we're going to be talking about is skin thickness. So according to one study, what they found out was that men and women, the collagen, so for women, the collagen thickness remained pretty constant, and then until about age 50, then the collagen, the thickness of their skin measurably dropped off. Now men, their skin thickness actually started to drop off about 45, but the skin thickness was not constant for men. What they found is their decrease of collagen, the thickness of their skin, actually started around age 20. So in another clinical study that was done, they found that women who were treated with estradiol and testosterone, their collagen production was actually 50% higher than postmenopausal women who were not treated with any type of hormone therapy. And their hydroxyproline was actually higher, and that's actually the major component of the protein in the collagen. So the one area of the face that actually showed the most difference in the thickness was actually the forehead. So men actually tend to have thicker skin in the forehead. Women tend to have thinner skin in the forehead. So without talking about just collagen, we have to go into elastin or elasticity. So obviously as we get older, the elasticity of our skin starts to shrink. Our skin starts to not become as firm. So we're going to talk a little bit about elasticity of the skin. So in another clinical study showing elasticity between men and women was very, very small. It was not as significant. So when they measured it, the elasticity was, so for men it was 0.27, women it was 0.273. Now, where the most difference in elasticity showed was actually not the face, but actually the most elasticity was the abdomen for women. So I'm thinking, well, that kind of makes sense because, you know, if women tend to have children, their stomach starts to expand. So in the abdomen is where they showed the most difference in elasticity for both men and women. So ultimately, even though for women, the skin around the abdomen showed more elasticity. Overall, women had less elasticity on the other parts of their body, such as the face or the forearm, but it was more able to bounce back when the skin was stretched. So now we're going to be talking about wrinkles and sagginess. So there was one study that was done on 173 Japanese men and women. And what they found was men tended to have more wrinkles across the forehead than women. And there was no difference, both for the sex differences, for the upper eye wrinkles, except for the age group of 65 to 75, where women had, regardless of if they use skincare or not, women had about the same, if not more wrinkles than men. So overall, in all age groups, men tended to have more facial wrinkles in all of the groups than, of course, women. So in the age group above 60 years old, overall, women tend to have less wrinkles that were due to sun exposure. And it may be obviously because they're not in Japan. The culture is that you want to be fair skinned, not tan. So it may be because they are not outside as much and they tend to avoid the sun. Facial sagging, especially on the lower eyelids of men, were more apparent than women. So before we get into the hydration and tool and how it affects the differences between men and women, if you're finding this information helpful or you think someone else could find this information helpful, please make sure to give us a thumbs up and go ahead and share this video. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, we would love it if you subscribe. Hit that subscribe button and don't forget to hit that notification bell. So who do you think experiences more issues with hydration and tool, otherwise known as transepidermal water loss, men or women? So reply in the comments below. And once you do that, let's move on. So as mentioned before, men typically produce more sebum and they have larger pore size. And because of the excess sebum production or more sebum production, here are two things that they face. So due to the excess production of sebum, one of the things that they face is that they have a feeling of tackiness on their skin. So they tend to avoid using skincare because that can, depending on what they're using, increase the tackiness, especially sunscreen. So that's one. And the other one is impaired barrier function. Overall, females tend to be less oily on the face and the neckline. However, those of you who have oily skin and breakout prone skin, you probably have experienced more tackiness using products, but because you love skincare products, you just found something different. Where typically overall, men tended to just stop using the product altogether. Now the next one was how sun exposure affects hydration in the stratum corneum, which is the upper layer of the skin. So it seemed that how sun exposure affected hydration for the short term didn't really affect younger people. However, women over the age of 50, it did affect their skin more in the forehead and the dorsal part, or so the upper part of the hand. Now that study was done on Chinese men and women. This other study actually is a little bit conflicting, and this was actually done, it was a German study. So the German study actually showed that younger men had higher levels of hydration in their stratum corneum even after sun exposure than women. Whereas the women in the study showed that the stratum corneum hydration actually was pretty stable all throughout their life and actually increased over time. Whereas with both men and women over the age of 70 years, the stratum corneum hydration did start to decrease. So overall, even though there were some studies that were done on different parts of the world where they may have had conflicting results, overall, when they measured and studied transepidermal water loss, hydration levels, hyperpigmentation, erythema, sebum secretion, color, and temperature, whereas evaluating all areas of that, they did find that all females relatively graded higher in their hydration levels. So in conclusion, if you are a man that is watching this, not saying you in particularly, but if you do tend to fall under the generalities of having more oil, you need to find a cleanser that is not cream-based, it's more gel-based or foam-based cleanser to break down that oil to allow for the increase of hydration. You need to concentrate more on water-based oil moisturizers versus maybe creams if you tend to fall under producing more sebum, because that tends to affect the hydration levels in the skin. So remember, makeup is an art and skin. So let's try this again before the FedEx man came in. Remember, makeup is an art and skincare is a science.